TrekFavorites. What are yours? Welcome to TrekFavorites. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is the show where you get to hear from some of my Trek friends as well as my tech friends about their favorite episodes of Star Trek. Any Star Trek, doesn't matter which series. Star Trek is Star Trek. This time, though, I am really excited to welcome Alison Pitt of Daily Star Trek News to the show. Alison, welcome. It's great to see you.
Hi, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you too. It's been too long.
Well, it has. Usually we get to see each other in Vegas at Star Trek Las Vegas, and that's about it. But Now, maybe since I've got you on here, maybe we'll make you more of a regular customer one way or another.
I would be glad to do it. I can't make any commentary whatsoever on any of your Mac stuff that you do, but Star Trek I could talk about.
Well, and of course, you have a history as a Star Trek podcaster, not just with Daily Star Trek News, but also as part of the Priority One team for a long time, probably since before I knew you.
I started on Priority One in 2015. So just over 4 years ago, I started. And now that I was still one of the newish people for Priority One. Priority One as a production started in, gosh, it had been going for 4 or 5 years by the time I joined. So it's a pretty long-standing production. And it was Elijah actually who recruited me to join that team, and then sort of brought me in and taught me everything I know. And of course, now I've branched out and done other things as well on just off the back of that. Yeah.
Well, and before we get into it, I want to make sure that I compliment you on a terrific. I feel like now it's not new anymore, but it may probably still seem new to you. The Daily Star Trek News. I would not have thought that you could do a daily Star Trek news show, even in today's environment with everything that's happening. And you do it so masterfully, and you really do add value to it with all the little things that are not just news, but the trivia and the history things, and then the advertisements or notifications, if you will, of cons all over the world. I think you've done an amazing job with it.
Oh, well, that's really, really kind of you to say. It's funny, one of the first things that if anybody hears I'm doing a daily Star Trek news show, the first thing they ask is, how is there enough to do a daily news show? And part of that is because I've added in little tidbits to keep you going. I've also I feel really passionate about people getting out and talking to other Trek fans, like face to face. I think, all of the quote unquote fandom issues and the way that people, control each other on the internet, and some of the fights and animosity that kind of rises. I think a lot of that goes away when you're face to face with somebody. So I really feel passionate about getting people out to meet with other people in real life. So I try to compile anywhere there's going to be like a bit of a Trek focus. In events, we cover everything from, I always say I cover everything from, somebody showing Star Trek 3 at a library, all the way up to San Diego Comic-Con. So I try to cover everything in between, and try to cover as much of the country and the world as I possibly can, because you would be amazed. Like, so today's Wednesday. So yeah, I'll be doing that tonight. You'd be amazed at how many Trek events are out there. Like I struggle to keep up with it. It's probably the busiest. It's probably the biggest segment of what I do. Second only to the actual news, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Well, and it's not just Star Trek, because we are all Star Trek fans, but we're also fans of the actors who do it, and so it's easy to want to keep up with their other projects and all, even if they're not Trek related, because there's something about, I guess, being on a Star Trek series that they become part of the family, and the fandom, the fans embrace them, and then become fans of their work in other areas, and it just all is this wonderfully great synergy that we all feed off of.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. And in fact, it was funny because I was rewatching the episode that we're going to talk about today earlier today, and it was kind of like, it was like putting on an old warm sweater, because I actually haven't watched TNG in a while. I've been working my way through the other shows because I must have watched TNG 3 or 4 times start to finish, right? So I've been doing alternating between Deep Space Nine and the original series. And I haven't seen those characters in a while in TNG. And so watching this, I was like, oh, I love all these guys. and it's true that the like sort of visceral feeling of, gosh, I really miss them, that really feeds into then, anytime you have an opportunity to go out and see them in real life or talk to other people who also like to go and see them and talk to them, it really makes a difference in your life.
So something that has started happening since I started this show that I really didn't expect is guests have kind of volunteered that this Star Trek series is quote unquote my Star Trek series, and I can't say that I really feel that way necessarily about any of them, because in my mind they're all my Star Trek series. But it sounds like you're one of those that TNG is your Star Trek series.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, I could psychoanalyze myself. I think part of that is because I got into Star Trek when it was in syndication when I was a teenager, and I used to watch it twice a day. I used to go to a magnet school for high school, so my bus journey in the morning and in the evening was about an hour long. And if I wasn't like scrambling last minute to do my homework on the bus, I was daydreaming or sleeping. But if I was daydreaming, I was daydreaming about being on the Enterprise. So, and that was the only Star Trek that I had at the time. I'm sure the original series was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was watching TNG. And I think that whole where it's kind of tied up in my adolescence makes it like mine. Everything else is like a spinoff. But TNG to me is sort of the one that's sort of like ingrained in my soul. So yeah, I would definitely say that TNG is my Star Trek.
Okay, well, and again, there's nothing wrong with it. I think depending on exactly when you came along and what was airing and what your interests were, definitely colors your perception of all of the series. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a very interesting phenomenon that most people identify with one series or the other as their track. So you decided, though, to pick, and I'm really anxious to hear why, this Phantasms, which is season 7, episode 6 of Next Generation. So I ask the same question all the time to start out. What is it about this particular episode that resonates with you?
Well, first of all, I have to say it wasn't going to be my first choice. I initially, when I was feeling very serious and, scholarly, I thought about choosing Tuvix, because Tuvix is from Voyager is one of my favorite ones to kind of like chew on. There's a lot of meat there to kind of dive into. And then I remembered that this show is called TrekFavorites. So I went, you know what? The episodes of Star Trek that I like the most are the ones that are fun, or they have a good blend of like fun and a message. And Phantasms absolutely suits those two needs to a T. It's one, and we'll come on to this, I quote it all the time and I don't even realize. While I was rewatching it, I was like, wow, all these things that I quote all the time, they're actually from one episode. And just the imagery and all the stuff that happens in it. I love it. I can eat it up. I actually watched it twice today. Just because it was just so enjoyable to watch. So yeah, I purely went on an episode that I'm not even sure I can explain why, but I just really love it.
Well, then I will ask why. I mean, because there's certain aspects of it that I think definitely definitely colors the whole perception of the episode. I mean, the surrealism when Data is in his dream state, for lack of a better term. I think we can all identify with that as having dreams, and not even necessarily nightmares, but dreams where things are the juxtaposition of things is just completely outlandish, and yet for some reason in the dream it works. And so I feel like we can relate to that here, but some of it then takes a much darker turn to it.
It's possible. So I'm somebody that I would consider myself a pretty vivid dreamer. I can remember recurring dreams that I've had since I was a child. And when I'm in light sleep, I dream a lot, and I like to sleep. So I I like dreaming. And so it's possible that this sort of excites that little piece of it. You're right about a lot of the imagery that happens in it is really absurd. And it's a nightmare without being a nightmare until it is. Some of my favorite parts, I'll just rattle off some of my favorite parts. I love when Data goes to speak, and it's just that horrible, horrible siren sound, which makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up just watching it on television. I love that he's got a phone in his chest. I love when Dr. Crusher is drinking through the straw out of the side of Commander Riker's head. These are all things that, not the exact things, but these are all the type of things that I remember from my own dreams, things that are like absurd, that you're like, that's got to mean something, or there's got to be a reason for that being there. And then, so for me, I think I identified with Data kind of going along this journey, trying to figure out what's happening. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, I think I wouldn't even want to think about how many years it would take on the couch to psychoanalyze my dreams. We're not going to go there, but it does. At first you're not quite sure what's happening, and then you come to understand it, and then you realize that there's an actual objective cause for it. And they have to figure out what it is, because there are clearly messages going on. And at the first dream sequence, that's not evident. But then as you move farther along, now we're clearly working towards something. We just don't know what. And it's probably one of the more nebulous plots, if you will, of trying to figure out what is going on. And I think that's what makes me keep wanting to watch it. I don't mind saying up front, this was not one of my Trek favorites, but this happens often. If I go back and have to watch it again and listen to commentary by someone who really does appreciate it, it colors my perception a little bit in a positive fashion.
I love one of the things about this story is that it's a I don't know how to put what I'm thinking into words. So we know that Data isn't dreaming. You said at the beginning, we don't necessarily know that he's having a dream. It's just sort of a slightly like the I don't know what the technical term is, but the focus is slightly out on the shot, and something's a little off, and you can't quite tell what it is. And then you kind of come to find out that Data is dreaming, but of course, androids don't dream. He does, but he doesn't. And this is a classic science fiction, like a metaphor for, like, I identify with it as my dreams and I'm working through this problem that's happening. But that's not actually what's happening. Data's not dreaming these things. He's kind of sensing them, or, whatever. It's a science fiction interpretation of what's a natural phenomenon for humans. And so you have there's like a story, and there's also like the meta story that's going on top of it, which is kind of gives you layers to think about while you're going through the episode.
Yeah, and it's also, if we pull back just a little bit from the story itself, we are talking about Data's ongoing exploration of, I guess, of humanity, which is always an interesting discussion to have. An android trying to examine humanity maybe become human, whatever that means. So he has programmed himself to have dreams. Or if I remember correctly, Dr. Sung programmed him to have dreams at some point. So, that's an interesting aspect of humanity that I don't think a lot of us really think about, just because it's been part of us since we were, first aware of ourselves, is that dreaming. And yet here it is parading down, the halls of the Enterprise in all its absurdity.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to tell you, I've got a couple favorite things about this episode, though. One of which is Picard trying to get out of going to the Admiral's dinner.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Because I feel like that's something that we've all done at some point. It's like, oh, God, I got to go do that. And how do I get out of this? And, Picard ends up, actually being able to get out of it and having, I guess, a passable excuse.
Mm-hmm. That's a really nice. Go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, did you enjoy that as much as I did?
I did. I mean, I think you could hyperanalyze it and say that's not really within Picard's character, because he's supposed to be the exemplary Starfleet officer. But I think it actually, in season 7, he's been through so much in his life. There's got to be an element of, I have no time for bureaucracy. And so that moment, that sort of confession to Riker about, I've gotten out of it 6 years in a row. I think the 7th is going to be a stretch. That it adds like a little bit of humanity to him. That's really nice to see, and I think is probably a good progression of his character. Especially, eventually we get into the movies where he's even more out on his own than he was during season 7 of the series. So I like that. I think it's cute. I don't think it does any harm. I worry what it says about the admirals in Starfleet, because nobody seems to want to hang out with them.
Well, but I think that's true of any senior management of anything is always perceived to be a bit stuffy and maybe taking themselves a little too seriously. And I don't think that's admirals in Star Trek or your industry or mine or anybody else's. I think there are those perceptions that those formal events can become a bit tedious.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that. Yeah, and it's interesting that he doesn't seem to see that as an opportunity for like advancement or anything. He doesn't seem to care. It's not, if I got invited to a dinner with like the CEOs of my company, I would probably turn up, because networking, right? Raising your visibility within your organization. And that is clearly something that Picard is not interested in at all, which, reminds me of Kirk, actually, with his, he just wants to be on his starship. And I thought that was a nice little piece of personality, because generally speaking, I feel like Picard, he believes in the ideals of the Federation, and generally speaking, he toes the line pretty well, except in the case of, the odd evil admiral. But that him trying to avoid that dinner and not like being like, well, I have to go because one day I'm going to be an admiral. I found that really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I love Rikers. I mean, he does such a great job of acting with his facial expressions. You can tell he's delighting over in a good, very good natured way over Picard's discomfort and trying to get out of it and not going to be able to. And I don't have to go, you have to go.
Yeah,
I can relate to that for some reason, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
The other one though is doesn't really advance the plot, but I love the little dialogue between Worf and Data when Worf is going to be taking care of Spock.
I was going to mention that.
that is so good.
I will feed him.
Yeah, and from both actors are so good at. Data's just going a little overboard with the cat thing, and Worf is just getting more and more disgusted, and just there's a point that, okay, that's it, I'll feed him and forget the rest.
I don't even know how they did that scene, because Worf is Michael Dorn is standing there with a live cat who's going like this, like trying to scratch him. And he's just totally straight faced, and Brent Spiner is, his dialogue is absurd. That Data would care so much about the cat, but of course he does. The fact that that scene happened is just a miracle to me. I think it's amazing. It's so enjoyable to watch.
Have you been around cat people, Alice?
I am a cat people.
You are a cat people. Oh,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
That's how that's how in my experience, that's how cat people talk, and it's like these are little furry humans to them. I don't understand it, but they are.
Well, actually, that's true. I did have a cat sitter come when I was on vacation a couple weeks ago, and I was like, okay, well, yeah, she likes people, but just like if her tail starts twitching, just walk away. She gets a little overwhelmed, So yeah, I get it. And this is actually the point that I wanted to raise was actually one of the things I love about this episode is it's a very serious episode. There's some good drama happening. Data stabs Counselor Troy. I mean, there's some dark things happening, and yet there's this sort of running current of humor, and it's kind of. I guess it's kind of like absurdist humor because it's just weird. Like the hillbilly miners and stuff is so weird, but humorous and light at the same time as it's dark and ominous. And those are the kind of episodes of Star Trek that I really, really like, where they're tackling serious things, but it's done in sort of a light way. Because I think that's how people are. I think that's how, when you're going through a trying time, you have humor because you kind of need it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's one method of coping, and it's probably one of the healthier methods of coping with difficult situations, assuming that, the humor can be appropriate in that difficult situation, at least at some level.
Mm. But this is like, so the other sort of humorous section is Data going to visit a holodeck version of, is it Freud?
Yep, Sigmund Freud.
to analyze his dreams. And they've scripted this thing that is completely bonkers. And, Data's there completely deadpan explaining what happens. I mean, you've got Freud saying, oh, it's the problems with your father. And he's like, I don't know my dad. Yes. It's sort of played deadpan, and yet it's really humorous. And then, of course, it gets woven back into the story towards the end in a really cool way. I would say it was a deftly written script. You get both that light and the dark at the same time.
Good for you. You make me consider that particular scene or those scenes in a completely different fashion that I really hadn't thought about, because they are humorous.
Yeah.
And yet they're not laugh out loud humorous, but they're the kind that you kind of grin to yourself humorous. Yeah. And I really didn't even recognize those as humorous. If I go back and think about it, I would have said more that we're back to that examination of Data as an android trying to approach things from a human standpoint and kind of failing miserably because it just doesn't apply.
Which we could have done, we could have done that using Counselor Troy. I know she had a different role to play later on, but that she's usually the one who's sort of helping him with his humanity things. The choice then for Brennan Braga, who wrote the script, the choice for that not to be the counselor that we know and love, and for it to be kind of a slight caricature of the most derivative, stereotypical psychologist that you could possibly pick in the holodeck, right? It's even funny that that's who Data chose, knowing Freud's reputation as a psychologist and how everything has to do with like your parents and sex and everything. It's absurd that that's who he chose, right? But it's that choice as opposed to just having it be, Commander Riker or Geordi telling him how to be human. They've made that choice to be deliberately kind of humorous and sort of lighten up the mood.
Yeah. So let's slide back to the darker part for just a second. Mm-hmm. One thing that kind of took me out of the episode a little bit. All right, so Data has just assaulted Counselor Troy in the turbo lift.
Yeah.
And then they're sitting down having a discussion with him, and he says, basically, I was dreaming again. And okay, I would think that at some point now Data has demonstrated the ability to be hostile to, a crewmate. Why wouldn't you lock him away? I mean, I think they escorted him out with 2 or 3 security guards, but Data's going to dispatch those with one hand tied behind his back. So that I found that just a little inconsistent.
I think so. This theme actually pops up several times in Star Trek: The Next Generation. We all, and the crew all, knows that Data has like superhuman strength. He's way stronger and way more durable than any single member of the crew, because he's a machine, right? But we have accepted him as a person, and we need to treat him like a person. So if they would have treated any other crew member in that way, they should be treating Data in that way. And think of it like this. If it wasn't Data, if it was Worf, who also is stronger than the average crew member, if Worf had been having bad dreams, waking dreams, and had stabbed a crew member, they would have carted him off. They would have probably treated him the same way. It's only because it's Data that sort of we as an audience naturally think, shouldn't he just turn him off or something for a while, until they figure out what's going on? But of course, that's an incredibly subhuman way to treat somebody who you think of as a member of the crew. And I think that goes back again to measure of a man. Is this a person or is it a machine? Is he a machine or is he a person? So I see where you're coming from, but also, if it weren't for the fact that he was a machine, would you be saying the same thing?
That's a fair point. And you brought up the obvious comparison to Worf in there. And, on the original series, I said Spock as well. Mm-hmm. That, all of these have superhuman strength and, capability of dispatching various crewmates. And yet, I guess the self-discipline of being confined to quarters or anything like that seems to be adequate. And look, I know we're talking about a TV show and you have to advance the plot to some degree. But it just, once in a while, it's like, okay, it's almost like the discussion that often comes up about the holodecks is, seem to be an awful lot of holodeck accidents. Why don't we shut down the holodeck until we get it right? But then you would kill a lot of really good episodes.
You also have to remember, they weren't out there for 7 years in real time. Even if they were out there for 7 years in real time, if you're looking at like an hour a week, so most of the rest of the time, everyone's fine. It's true that there are, even one holodeck accident is probably, bad, but as a ratio, it's probably fine.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, as far as the Data thing goes, too, I guess to be fair, we have situations in our society where somebody commits an act of violence, and too often, unless the act of violence is very high profile, they're back on the streets, and with relatively speaking, often minimal punishment or minimal restrictions. So, I guess there's a precedent there, to be fair about it.
Yeah, I think that I don't think they treat him, basically they don't treat him any different than anybody else. And it may have even been a deliberate choice to make you as an audience member a little bit uneasy and because your mind kind of naturally goes to, well, just turn him off, because he's deactivated himself before, I think. There's always that question in your mind. And then that also makes you question, is that the humane thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? I don't know.
I mean, depends on how much you buy into the idea that he is a self-aware being. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, I mean, I'm not ready to say human. Okay. So, but a self-aware being, as opposed to being just a machine.
Yeah, that acts like a self-aware being.
Yeah, and wants to be even more like a self-aware being. Wants to be a self-aware being.
Yeah, so, boy, that's a whole debate. We could go down a very large rabbit hole with that.
Yeah. We haven't touched on any of the, as we get on into the episode, about the infestation of the Enterprise by these, what I think they were called multiphasic creatures.
Yeah, something phasic, something.
Yeah. And the fact that, okay, this seems to be what is triggering some of Data's issues. And so there is an objective reason for it, no matter how it's being interpreted.
Right.
And then we have the whole issue of trying to resolve, because these can be potentially fatal to the entire crew.
Right.
And that added a new sense of urgency. And I think it didn't take it darker. It just turned it all of a sudden a lot more serious. That now we have to dissect all this weird symbolism and figure out what it means to save the ship.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean by this is a good science fiction treatment of something that we all experience on a regular basis. And I think science fiction for me is best when it takes something that's familiar to us and looks at it through a different lens. Because basically, the episode's about dream interpretation, isn't it? It's about, walking through a dream state, or it's a familiar feeling that we've all had when you wake up and you're trying to figure out what the heck was that all about. Except in this case, it's not a dream. It's a reaction to an external sciencey stimuli. So it's like it's that science fiction story about a familiar situation.
You said earlier that this episode is like putting on a warm, comfortable sweater.
Yeah.
And I've really find that interesting. And I've got to think about some episodes that I would feel that way about. This one isn't one of them for me. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that for you. It obviously punches certain buttons with you that it doesn't punch with me. But it still is an episode with a bit of depth and still a couple of my favorite moments in the whole series.
Yeah. Definitely. And I have to give a shout out to Brennan Braga. So I didn't realize that I was a fan of his until quite recently. So Brennan Braga is now a writer producer on the Orville. And some of the episodes that I've found the most enjoyable on the Orville, I found out after the fact are Brennan Braga ones. And then I go back and I look at some of my favorite TNG episodes, and again, they're Brennan Braga. This one was written by Brennan Braga. He's known for his sort of like body horror, psychological torture kind of themes, but it's done in a really good way. And this is actually like a total perfect example of what he's best at, is these types of bizarre stories.
You bring up another thing about Star Trek as a body of work and the fandom around it, that I don't know that I pay much attention to who writes episodes of just about any other TV series that I've ever watched. I mean, I might know who the showrunner is, and I might have some idea of the genesis of the project. But there's something about Star Trek that makes us all want to pay attention to who the producers, the directors, who put the story together because of that consistency. And you do find that you're maybe a fan of certain producers or certain directors or certain writers as opposed to some others. And again, I don't think there are any bad Star Trek episodes. There's some that are not my favorite. There's some that are objectively, arguably, really poorly done. But with this incredible body of work out there, you got to expect that at some point. Yeah,
there's going to be duds, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever paid attention to who was writing or anything like that for a long time. It's sort of, maybe in my old age, I'm more interested in it because after TNG kind of finished, and now I'm really curious, what did those people that were involved in that, what did they go on to do? But it was sparked by the Orville, which probably sounds like a cliche. But I love the Orville. To me, it fills that slot that has been missing since TNG finished. And so I spend a little bit of time trying to deconstruct what it is about that fills that spot for me, because it's not Star Trek. I mean, but it is, but it isn't. But what are the elements of that show that are kind of filling in the blanks for me? Like, there's one really fantastic episode that had Bob Picardo and John Billingsley in it. It was a Brennan Braga episode that, sorry, spoiler alert, John Billingsley turned out to be absolutely horrific. But it was a great it was very similar to this, and it just kind of hit all the same spots. And so I find myself going, what is it about it? Is it the actors? Well, no. Is it the sets? Well, no. They're shiny, but they're kind of cartoony. And then it comes back to the writing, the production, the editing, the sound design, those little things that go into making a show have its personality, that now I'm more in tuned to because I've seen it in a different place. I don't take it for granted anymore.
Yeah. And again, I think most Star Trek, no, I'm not going to say most, a lot of Star Trek fans pay a lot more attention to all the things you just mentioned, the editing, the sound design. I mean, obviously the makeup and the costuming. Yeah. It's a science fiction show, so jeans and a t-shirt are not going to cut it. Right. But the rest of it, I think we all pay a lot more attention to as part of the mythos and part of taking you into the world of Star Trek, whichever series it is, and having you buy the fact that you're in there. And
it's magic making, right?
Yeah, that's a much more eloquent way of saying it than I was trying to. Good job. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Anything else about this particular episode? I mean, I think we sort of ran it top to bottom. Any other particular points of delight for you?
Well, so as I was rewatching this, I realized that this episode, I can't remember if I was talking to you at the beginning of this or if I was talking to somebody else earlier. I was watching this and I was going, God, this show is so cool. This particular episode is so quotable for me. And I realized that a lot of the things that I quote on a regular basis are from this episode in particular. So the kills them all is from this. That's Freud, telling Data to kill all the little monster things. And I didn't realize the scene with Data handing over Spot to Worf and tell him he's a good cat. And pet him and all that. I didn't realize that was from this. This episode is the origin of the meme. I don't know if you've seen it, saying it's a picture of Data with a phone in his chest saying the original mobile phone with an unlimited data plan. It's so, there's something about it, and the cellular peptide cake with mint frosting. There's at least one person every year at STLV who brings out a cake of Counselor Troy, and the thing with the straw coming is so weird and gross. But these are it's, for me, it's iconic, and it just sticks in my head just, I don't know, something sticky. And it was wonderful to watch it over again, because I kind of had forgotten that all of these things that are always in my consciousness came from Phantasms.
Now that would be interesting for you to pick another favorite episode and see if that has that same effect. If you go and rewatch it and really think about it, so maybe we'll get you to do another one and we'll explore that aspect. Because you're right. I mean, you're right. Those are very definitely quotable things, and the meme with Data, of course, is perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. I'm trying to remember if Sigmund Freud made any other appearances on Star Trek. I think he was in one other, but I can't place it.
I can't remember exactly. Wasn't there one that was Sigmund Freud and Stephen Hawking and somebody else?
Oh, around the poker table?
Yeah.
Einstein was there. Hawking was there. Was it Newton?
I don't know. I'm going to Google it right now.
Okay.
Freud. Shout out to the Great Memory Alpha, which is my source of everything Star Trek.
Right there with you. And while you're looking up, I'll do a plug for Memory Alpha. That's always the link that I put in the show notes to the episode, so that if you are not quite familiar with it, you can go back and get a quick summary and see what we're talking about.
Yeah, it looks like he's been in a few episodes. Actually, I don't know whether it was the same actor every time, but it looks like he was in The Big Goodbye in TNG, Phantasms, this one, Emergence, which I don't remember which one that is, and one in Voyager, or maybe it's just a reference to him. I'm not sure. I don't know. One of your listeners maybe has to write in and tell us exactly all the times that he's been around. It doesn't look like he was at that one around the poker table. That I must be confusing him with Einstein, probably.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those things. This is the great thing about this kind of show. Completely unscripted, completely unprepared. It's just what do we like and what did it mean to us?
Right.
And you may have come up with my favorite phrase ever about an episode of any series. It just is like a comfortable sweater to pull on, because that's the way I feel about a number of Trek episodes. That if I just need a little, honest to God, really need some real escapist things, I'll pull out a favorite episode and watch it, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
So obviously, Daily Star Trek News is where folks can find you. Where are all the social media presences and everything on for you?
Well, the best place to go is dailystartreknews.com. It's the easiest one to remember. All of the social media links are there. On Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'm Daily Trek News. There's no star because it wouldn't fit in the number of characters. It was too long. But yeah, dailystartreknews.com has got the links to everything. It's and if you search on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, whatever podcast catcher you use, it'll be there. So hopefully easy to remember. That's why I named it that.
And of course, I'll have links in the show notes so that people can jump right to it and find it easy if there's any question about it. Yeah. And we should say that it's part of the Roddenberry Star Trek Podcast Network. That's
right. It's part of the Roddenberry Podcast Network, along with Mission Log and Priority One and Women at Warp and the Trek Files and Shabam and Mission Log Live. I hope I remembered everyone.
So
you can find all of those at podcasts.roddenberry.com. Those are all listed there, so go check that out too.
Yeah, and see, that's why I didn't try to do it, because I knew I'd forget somebody's, and I didn't want to take the chance. So but a lot of if you want to talk Trek, those are the places you go, because they're just all such great shows, and they all approach Star Trek from different angles. And that's the fun of it. So Alison, please come back and do this again. This was a whole lot of fun, and I'd love to see what your next pick is.
I would also love to see what my next pick is. Well, the thing is, I have quite a few. Maybe one day I'll do two, Vix. Maybe one day.
Okay. All right. Well, you have a standing invitation. When you're ready to come back, let me know and we'll get you back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Trek Favorites. You can, if you have comments about this, you can send them directly to me, Chuck at TrekFavorites.com. You can post to our Facebook page. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version, you can see the video version of this on our website and on our YouTube channel. Until the next time, thanks for joining us. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.